We thank you for that. Over the course of the conference so far, we've heard quite a lot about the humanitarian impact of war, the horrors of war, the work of Bertha von Suttner to highlight the importance of peace. We've heard about the involvement of the military-industrial complex, the vested interests in militarization and war, and some of the ideas on that. What we're looking at in this session today is looking at another aspect, which is the alternatives to the use of force and the threat of force in international relations. So in order to be able to abolish war and to eliminate militaries or weapons and the arms race, then there needs to be confidence amongst states and amongst peoples that it's possible to resolve international conflicts without reliance on the threat or use of force. This was something, of course, which Bertha von Suttner was very engaged in. We've heard a little bit about that so far, about some of the initiatives that she was involved in, like promotion of arbitration and the establishment of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Today we're looking at exploring what are some of those mechanisms that are currently available and some of the approaches that are currently available to resolve international conflicts in particular, and to provide confidence that one can have security without reliance on the threat or use of force. But also what else might be necessary, what else might be required in order to ensure that there is the confidence that it's possible to resolve conflicts this way. We're going to start. The first speaker is Christine Muttonen from Austria. She's the co-president of our network of parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. She was a long-time member of the Austrian Parliament, where she was a leader in these issues as well as other ones, often working cross-party to get cross-party resolutions adopted to support nuclear disarmament issues. And then for a period she was the co-president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and through that experience I was very involved in issues of peace and security and adopting a common security and conflict resolution approach, which is the reason for the existence of the OSCE. So Christine, we'll ask you to open the floor with some comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a little hint, I was then elected president for the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, having been the second woman within 28 years or so. This was just no, it's just to give you the information about women, the lack of women. Thank you very much for the invitation here in Prague and in these beautiful rooms here in the Foreign Ministry. Bertha von Suttner is in Austria is on our daily mind because we have her on the coin. Before that we had her on the banknote, so people really know Bertha von Suttner. And I can tell you, first I don't come from Vienna, I come from the south of Austria, close to the border to Italy and Slovenia. And before I moved around in this little city, I was living in the Bertha von Suttner Straße, which is very nice. Really, it just came on my mind when I came to this conference, and I thought, God, I was living in the Bertha von Suttner Straße. How nice! In 2014, Bertha von Suttner and Alfred Fried were busy organizing the 21st International Peace Congress, which was about to meet in Vienna, and everything was prepared. It was a peace conference, what we try to do here today as well. At that time, more than 400 high-profile guests from all over the world had already announced their coming to debate and to discuss how war could be prevented, how the arms race could be stopped, and how a necessary disarmament could be started. You probably know the 21st Peace Congress in Vienna never took place. It was planned for September, and on the 28th of July the First World War started. Today, two disastrous world wars later, our world is still far away from being a peaceful place. That's why it's so important that we meet and discuss those issues. There is a quote, "We live in times of existential crisis within and beyond the European Union." And this is not just a catchy headline from a tabloid paper. It is the introduction to the global strategy paper for the EU's foreign and security policy of 2016. Today, the world has become more chaotic, with growing nationalism, growing distrust, with confrontational, conflict-oriented policies, with an increasing amount of conflict. The risk of being caught in a downward spiral of nationalistic rhetoric, mistrust, military deterrence, and rearmament is increasing. The war of words has already started, and the question is, what comes next? In addition, we have to find answers to threats and issues like terrorism, human trafficking, drugs and arms trafficking, cybercrime, social and economic inequality, migration and refugee movements, and climate change. All in all, enormous challenges. This situation has us even brought to the return of nuclear thinking. We thought 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we thought this might come to an end. But no, it's the reverse. It's a return. So we have to end and reverse this extremely dangerous development. We have to work again on building a basis for a common security system, a basis that takes the security concerns of all countries equally into account, because a security architecture that is not balanced and is valid for all of them doesn't work. In order to achieve this, we need to keep and strengthen our existing platforms for dialogue, and where necessary, create new ones. We have to make people aware that the money spent for armament would make much more sense being spent on education or combating climate change. We need allies, we need governments, we need civil society, we need our national and international parliaments. One outstanding example of cooperation in the fight against nuclear weapons were the 3 international conferences on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, organized in Norway, Mexico, and Austria. Governments, parliamentarians, NGOs, organizations like the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, ICANN, or PNND were partners. These conferences should increase the awareness and the knowledge about the tragic impacts of any use of nuclear weapons, the dreadful global consequences on health, on environment, on climate, food security, social cohesion, infrastructure, economy. In fact, consequences potentially threatening the survival of humanity. We found out that when you talk about treaties and the legal issues of treaties, it's very difficult to communicate this to civil society. But when you talk about human issues, about the human consequences of a nuclear threat or catastrophe, then people start to understand and get engaged. As a result, Austria invited other states to sign the so-called humanitarian pledge, which in the end was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in form of a resolution. This finally led to negotiations of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was passed by the General Assembly of the UN in July 2 years ago. So we really have to show alternatives to military build-ups and nuclear deterrence. We have to strengthen the existing nuclear weapons-free zones. It was already mentioned how important nuclear weapon-free zones are. And the question is, why shouldn't we just dare and think big, like why not having a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East? Why not think about neutrality for countries which are in the middle of a conflict? When they talk about the way they want to go, many of them, they want to be a member of the NATO, thinking that then they will be secure. Why not talk about issues like neutrality as giving a chance for disarmament, giving a chance for saving money, using the money for something else? As I mentioned, parliaments are important because parliaments can make a difference. I mean, we've seen in this year, we have seen in some countries that parliaments can make a difference. We still follow what's happening in the UK, for example. Parliaments and parliamentarians can play a crucial part in the process of starting negotiations, stigmatizing and reducing weapons, nuclear weapons, with the goal to eliminate them. They can influence governmental positions, for example, and Alan already mentioned it. They could simply refuse their consent to make the necessary money for new arms available. Parliaments can help to raise and to maintain awareness because parliamentarians easily interact and cooperate with civil society and other parliaments, and because they can, and that's what you also said, can bring in joint motions and support or challenge the government. We found that even if it's sometimes hard to negotiate with a party which is has totally different ideas. But when you come to this human issue, for example, of nuclear questions and nuclear threats, then I found out that you even can talk easily across the parties and have joint motions. And this again is a sign for other parliaments maybe to act. Parliamentarians should connect, exchange experiences and best practices and discuss the possibility of joint action. And parliamentarian assemblies play an important role in the international level, in the international field. Interparliamentarian dialogue between elected representatives can help foster a better understanding of the other. You know, if you don't know the other, then usually it's a kind of, you're a kind of enemy or something, but if you get to know them easily in such a group, then it helps you to start a dialogue. The understanding of the other can lead to an easing of tensions. The settings of the Interparliamentarian Assembly, such as the OSCE PAs, the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, which consists of 56 countries, the IPU, the Parliamentary Assembly of the NATO, the Commonwealth of Independent States and others, are much more informal than the meetings of the governmental branch. They are good places for first contacts and trial balloons. Also, their discussions are not bound by diplomatic rules and consensus. They are more open and vivid. For example, in the OSCE, there is the part of the governmental part, and the part of the parliamentarians. On the governmental side, where all the ambassadors meet in Vienna, it is very difficult because they have a consensus role. So when you have debates on an issue where maybe the Ukraine and Russia has different opinions, then you never come to a consensus. When you talk about something where Armenia and Azerbaijan is involved, you never get a consensus because one is against it, and then you can't have, you don't get on. In the Parliamentary Assembly, we discuss, as we do in parliaments, and we have, with a majority of 50+1 vote, you can pass through motions or whatever. So the parliaments in that sense are also very important. Parliamentarians bring together ideas, perspectives and know-how from different member states and from a huge variety of political, cultural and religious backgrounds. So when you look at the OSCE, for example, then you have it goes up to Mongolia, and you have Central Asia there. So you have a lot of different religions and different cultures, and bringing them together in one room and talking to each other, sometimes not very friendly, but talking to each other and coming together, and then maybe having a hot discussion over a coffee. But they start talking, and that's so important. So this is why I think parliamentarian diplomacy is needed more than ever before. And I think another strength is that the interparliamentarian assemblies they have the good contacts to the legislative and to the executive branches and to civil society in many of the countries. In the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, the dialogue and confidence building are permanent on the top, a permanent point on the top of the agenda. In the sessions and annual conferences, discussions about security, disarmament took and still take place. Amendments and declarations were adopted to call on states to increase disarmament and confidence building measures, to promote mediation as cost-effective ways of preventing, managing and resolving violent conflict. It is much more important to see that, that with mediation, maybe you, and again I come back to the dialogue, then you can maybe start something and change something. And of course this needs money, but why not give the money to things like mediation and the possibility to start a dialogue. To support they supported also the humanitarian pledge and the no first use of nuclear weapons. And you always have to consider this, that within this parliamentary assembly there are of course countries which have nuclear missiles. So we passed some of those motions against Russia, against the US and others. So you can see that there is a majority going this way of trying to find the way, let's put it this way, trying to find the way to peace. And then there is PNND, the cross-party network of parliamentarians for non-nuclear proliferation disarmament, is always present with own side events, informing parliamentarians and widening the network against nuclear armament. And PNND is of great support and help in the disarmament process. When 20 years ago, or 22 years ago, when I started in Parliament, I have to tell the story. I got a call, and I was in the Committee on Foreign Affairs from the very beginning, and I got a call from someone called Alan Ware, and he said, well, you know, we deal with nuclear disarmament and so on. Are you interested? And I said, yes, well, of course, I'm interested in trying to find ways to peace. And then he said, oh yes, I'm in Stockholm just now, but I come around in 2 days. And he did. Then we met in Parliament, and he was telling me about PNND, and I was telling him about the issues I do. And since then we have been working together, and we tried to find also many parliamentarians from Austria to become member and work with PNND. So PNND is very important because parliamentarians, you know, you get elected in your constituency, and then you come to the capital city, to the parliament. You need information. You need assistance, you need help, and you need a little push, maybe here and there, to get involved. And that's why PNND is really very, very helpful, and I thank Prague and the Czech Republic to have them here. So it's really a very important support of you towards peace, because this starts really a new thinking in many countries. Then there is the Interparliamentarian Union, IPU. It's another very big global organization, and the founding of this organization goes back to Bertha von Suttner's initiative. She was already then thinking about a kind of world parliament. In cooperation with PNND, IPU published a handbook and distributed it to all parliaments. It provides a background and information on various aspects of nuclear non-proliferation disarmament. And in May last year, a strong signal came from women legislators who supported the Secretary General's new disarmament agenda, the appeal Common Security for a Sustainable and Nuclear-Free World, and it was released on Women's International Day for Peace and Disarmament. And something I really want to stress, and I always do, because, I'm sorry, I have a cold, because it's so close to my heart, it is high time for women to stand up and engage in foreign and security policy. When you look at the tables of people dealing with these issues, so I should say, well, maybe usually there are 2 women and, I don't know, 20 men, or 1 woman and 20 men. And being the president of the Parliamentary Assembly, the second woman for 28 years, I mean, it's incredible. And I found that women are not so much engaged as they should be engaged, especially in foreign, not only politics, but especially in foreign politics and in security politics. So if we think of creating new networks dealing with this issue, this is something we should have in our mind. From all the research we know is that women being engaged in peacemaking and peacekeeping and being at the negotiation table, peace negotiations deliver a better and more sustainable result. And this is not being against men, it's for together. It's like a 50-50 or 40-60 or whatever, but having women at the table is what I think is very important. So parliamentarians, when we talk what alternatives do we have, parliamentarians can take a range of action. They can be very creative. They can, as I said, cut fundings. They can prohibit weapons by law in the countries. They can support the ideas of nuclear weapon-free zones. They can talk to the governments, cities, pension funds, banks to de-invest from nuclear arms manufacturers, and they can and have to communicate all that with civil society. And they can support, for example, PNND actions like count the nuclear money. And I was, as you did and as you mentioned, and you were in New York just now, I think, just excursion, over $1 trillion. $1 trillion. I always have to think of what is a $1 trillion. It's the one with 18 zeros. Is being spent to modernize the nuclear arsenals of 9 countries over the next 10 years. That you could do something else with the money is no question. But can you imagine how much 1 trillion is? If you spend, and I took this from your website, if you spend $1,000 a day, and I can't believe it, but you need almost 2,740,000 years to spend it. But it's easy to spend $1,000 a second, right? If you spend $1,000 every second, then you only need 31 years. So we can do it. It's absolutely crazy thinking about those figures. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, our strength is dialogue, our strength is to raise awareness, to create the appropriate political pressure. This is also needed. Having been a parliamentarian myself, I know you have to work with that. You can work with civil society and put pressure on the parliamentarians put pressure on the government, so this is the way it works. Pressure for the security for all of us. Deterrence through military armament or even nuclear weapons is only an illusion to make the world safer. And the reality has proved the opposite. They make the world much less secure. And Bertha von Suttner, she knew it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm sure there's going to be points raised in the discussion. But just before I introduce the next speaker, I want to say just one thing, and that's I was very pleased that Christine, you raised the Interparliamentary Union and the role that Bertha von Suttner played to help establish it, because she was very instrumental. And I understand she was the only woman allowed to speak at the opening session, because back in that time there weren't any countries in Europe or virtually any other place in the world where women had the vote, so they couldn't come along to the Assembly to actually speak. The only country where women had the vote then was my country, New Zealand, but it was too far for them to come, so they didn't get there. But now, the things have changed so much that if you don't have women on your delegations, your parliamentary delegations to the IPU, then your delegation has fewer votes. So all the delegations there have both women and men, and they're very balanced. You know. So it's come a long way from when it was first established 130 something years ago, the IPU. Our next speaker is also a former parliamentarian, Ute Finckh-Krämer from Germany, and she has been one of the leaders in the Social Democratic Party in Germany in peace, conflict resolution, civil society development issues. When she was in Parliament, she was also the deputy chair of the Subcommittee on Disarmament and Arms Control. And as far as I know, the German Parliament is the only parliament in the world that has a subcommittee that is focused specifically on disarmament and arms control. The US has ones focused on weapons buying and producing and that, but not on disarmament. That's something unique to Germany. So I thought it was a very interesting experience that they have in the German Parliament of making disarmament a top priority in this committee. So we're very interested to hear from Ute Finckh-Krämer. Thank you.
Yeah. So I brought a picture. Can you? No, it doesn't.
Maybe it's in the
Oh, this one. Yeah. All right. So yes, I brought a picture. Can you refresh the picture, which I took as a parliamentarian when I was in Georgia? Because the film yesterday evening didn't mention that Bertha von Suttner lived 2 years in Tiflis, not only in this small house in the middle of nowhere, but also in Tiflis. And the house is still standing, and there, when I was there at least, there was not only a plate on it that it's to rent, but also a plate in German and in Georgian that this was a place where Bertha von Suttner and her husband spent 2 years. So I looked for this picture I made about 3 years ago to bring it to this conference. Another preliminary remark is that Christine and me met first in a parliamentary assembly of an organization which was not mentioned yet on this conference, the Council of Europe, which is bigger than the European Union. 47 countries are members of the Council of Europe, and I had the same impression like Christine, that these parliamentary assemblies are very, very helpful to understand the thinking of people in other countries, of parliamentarians as representatives of people in other countries. And I learned a lot during the 4 years I was member of the Bundestag and of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Now, my first remark I want to make, building on the Global Peace Index, we are a little bit disappointed that the Global Peace Index went down during the years it was made from 2008 to 2019. But we would have a Global Peace Index from the Cold War time. It would be much worse than it's now. During the last 30 years, that means since the Cold War stopped, the world became more peaceful, not less peaceful. The perception of the Cold War era as a period when nuclear deterrence prevented wars between the power blocs is wrong. The wars of that time took place outside of Europe, often as proxy wars. The wars in Korea and Vietnam cost millions of people their lives. Long-during wars with hundreds of thousands of victims took place in Afghanistan, between Iran and Iraq, in Congo, Sudan, Nigeria, Angola. Fortunately, we are today much more sensitive to war and violence than we were during the Cold War era. Our sensitivity and media coverage of war and violence is growing, not overall war and violence. A second advantage of being a parliamentarian is the possibility to visit international organizations like the United Nations. And so I want to give some details on the role of the United Nations for prevention and reducing of war and violence. The United Nations were established in 1945, immediately after the end of World War II, which started with the German aggression against Poland 80 years ago. And the world saw lots of efforts to contain and reduce war, civil war and violence since that time. My topics will come from the last years, because some new developments or developments of the last years can help, in my opinion, to overcome using military force in international relations. I had to translate my German statement to English this morning, so two institutions of the United Nations are especially important for preventing and reducing war and violent conflict, and these are new institutions which were developed in the last years. One is the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, which were two departments until last year, the Department of Political Affairs and the Department of Peacebuilding Affairs, and within this department, the Mediation Support Unit. It's a new development that the United Nations and the department, which is chaired by the Secretary General, are active in diplomatic mediation, and that's something we don't read in our media about successful mediation to prevent war. But it's happening day for day, and it's It's happening because of this mediation support unit, but also because of mediation, diplomatic mediation efforts of a lot of member countries of the United Nations. And in the German Foreign Office, the topic of diplomatic mediation is established since 2014. It's a new development in Germany. I think Switzerland and Norway are active in this topic much longer than Germany, but it's growing, the knowledge about diplomatic mediation. And about the Women Global study on the implementation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, Christine spoke already. It was a big step forward as well. Another big step which was reached within the United Nations context was on 25th September 2015, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 17 goals and 169 targets are being binding for all 193 UN member states. Goal 16, peace, justice and strong institutions, give a sound basis for reducing war, civil war and violence. Its longer form is promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. So this is something we can build upon as well during, well, the next 10 to 11 years. A short notice to the European Union. It was founded as a civil power, not as a military power, and we should support strongly to maintain its civil and political character. You mentioned already the importance of the OSCE for the preservation and restoration of peace in Europe. In the last years, its importance grew again, mostly due to the role of the OSCE in the Ukraine conflict and war with the Special Monitoring Mission. Regarding the deterioration of the INF Treaty and the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, it is very important that the confidence building and verification systems which were developed within the OSCE during the 90s are still working, especially the Treaty on Open Skies and the Vienna document. The Treaty of Open Skies has 34 member states. All the big OSCE states are members of this treaty as well. 4 of the 5 official nuclear powers are members of the OSCE and members of this treaty. And it's really interesting to have a deeper look in this treaty, which helps as confidence building and verification instrument within the whole OSCE territory. It is crucial to preserve and strengthen the role of OSCE in confidence building and disarmament and arms control within the whole OSCE region, which is spanning the whole NATO and the whole former Warsaw Pact territory and the European countries not belonging to NATO. So, I have good news from Germany as well. 4 weeks ago in the German Bundestag, parliamentarians from 4 of the 6 parties in parliament, the 3 parties on the left side, and a member of the Christian Democratic Union, founded a parliamentary circle supporting the ban of nuclear weapons. 3 years ago, some parliamentarians and peace activists in Germany and the United States started an initiative called Détente Now. Its central point is to stop a new arms race in Europe by recalling the basic idea of the politics of détente, which are in Germany strongly connected with the names of Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr. Egon Bahr was the founder of the Subcommittee on Arms Control and Disarmament and Non-proliferation in the German Bundestag when he was a parliamentarian at the beginning of the 80s. Brandt's Ostpolitik in the 70s was based on the insight that you have to take into account how your own actions are perceived by a potential adversary or enemy, and that you cannot build security against others, only together with them as common security. And that is valid today as much as it was in Cold War times, even if we have now not a bipolar but a multipolar security system in the world. Here in Prague, it is important to mention that Brandt and Bahr respected also the interests of the Eastern European countries, especially Poland and Czechoslovakia. Brandt's strongest political enemies in Germany were people who kept alive territorial claims against Poland and claims of restitution of property against Czechoslovakia. It is crucial for all peace and disarmament politics in Europe today as well to keep in mind the interests of these Central European countries. I have a last example of a very interesting civil society initiative, which is very encouraging. It is the approach of the international peace organization, Non-Violent Peace Force, to protect civilians in armed conflicts by unarmed civilian protection. Well-trained international and national field team members are protecting civilians and reducing tensions on the grassroots level in conflict areas. It works, for example, in South Sudan, where NP is protecting international displaced persons, or in Mindanao in the Philippines, where NP has an official role in a ceasefire agreement, which is really remarkable for a civil society organization, even when it's an international organization. So, I leave the rest for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ute, for quite an optimistic presentation on the various mechanisms that are available for the resolution of conflict, and that many of them are being used effectively already. There's many to talk about. I'm just going to flag one before I introduce our next speaker, because it's one that's not very well known, which is the mediation services of the United Nations. I mean, people know a lot about the International Court of Justice and the Permanent Court of Arbitration and the International Criminal Court, but not so much is known about the mediation services of the United Nations, and that they have successfully mediated a huge number of disputes. And we know this from our country in New Zealand, because we had a very successful mediation from the United Nations when we had a very powerful country attacking us, blowing up a peace boat in our harbour, and then when we caught them, they put an economic boycott on us. So we were the victims and being punished. And we brought in the UN mediation, and it actually worked. We managed to get over that dispute, and we're now good friends with that powerful country, France. And the only times we have the big competition is in the Rugby World Cup, which is happening at the moment. And I think we're going to beat them. So, sorry about that, a little Kiwi pride there. But the UN Mediation Service, I think, does, because this new unit is actually helping people recognise that the mediation works in most of the times when it's employed, and it can be very successful, but it's mostly behind the scenes, and so you don't hear about it that much, and it's good for countries to know that it's available. It's so successful. Thank you. Our next speaker is Thomas Hilker, who's a program manager for Love for Life, an organisation based in Berlin, NGO. They have an initiative for peace, which is an international initiative and is actually making grounds at the United Nations at the moment, which is where I met one of their other people from the organisation, which is to establish cabinet-level departments of peace in governments and to get international support for this. And the international support is coming through, I believe, a draft UN resolution or something else happening at the United Nations. So we're very interested in hearing about this idea of cabinet-level departments of peace. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Alan, for this introduction, and thank you for the whole organization of this wonderful event. Maybe on a personal note, also I come from Germany and I went to school in Bonn, where we have Bertha von Suttner Conference that is quite well known. But still in school no one heard about Bertha von Suttner, so not even at university studying political science or international relations in Germany we've heard about Bertha von Suttner. And so for me it's great to be here on her legacy, and her legacy is connecting us from different places, and I think this is great, and in a way we're following the legacy by having this peace congress that is also what she called for so many times. And then thank you also for letting me contribute with this rather new initiative that we're launching as a NGO, but as has been said yesterday, it's not about non-governmental opposed to governmental institutions, but as a civil society, maybe as a third sphere of the government, has been mentioned. And so what we really intend to do with our initiative is that it is a bottom-up process that includes, people, local peace builders, but also ordinary people everywhere, so that ambassadors for peace can be, everyone from school children to students and beyond. So this is really what we want to bridge, is the gap between, which is already what parliamentarians are doing, bridging the gap between civil society and the government, but also having a direct link somehow to altering, changing the peace infrastructures within one country. And so I'm also very glad that I'm a part of a panel that, from a gender perspective, is very positive for peace. And also to remark on this, that we have heard this is one of the important alternatives to establish peace. And there are many alternatives that have been mentioned so far and that are all complementary. And also referring to Bertha von Suttner at her Nobel lecture, she mentioned that the societies, or the society that she lives, but I would claim that we are still in a way in a society, and as she mentioned, it is built upon the denial of the possibility of peace. And she was claiming for the possibility of peace, even though other people called her utopian or unrealistic, and we have heard that this is the most realistic approach that actually we can have. And so also the initiative for peace is built on this idea of creating or co-creating a culture, a holistic culture of peace in Germany, and based in Germany and also worldwide through our approaches in international platforms. And so this is one of the points that we intend to do. And we have also heard about the actual context on peace and war, and that it looks like it is this denial of the possibility of peace is somehow verified, but the actual arms race and authoritarian governments and hate speech, all these new propagandas, and so we really think we need to put peace back on the principal agenda, the central agenda. And so this initiative calling for cabinet levels peace ministries is also to create a debate, because peace, as we have heard, also is a debate, it's a process. So we want to get into this process of putting the centrality of peace, and also maybe by a bit more bold and radical ideas. And we're here at the Ministry, Foreign Ministry, and I very much thank that we can be here, and then I'm calling for a Ministry of Peace. But it doesn't. There are different forms. Also, we have heard the example of New Zealand as an example, as a peace builder in a way on international level, and also there is a peace minister as part of the foreign ministry. So yeah, and then also to maybe counter this idea that it could be utopian is if we look at the numbers, and we have heard some of the numbers and the statistics, and research for the Institute of Economics and Peace indicates that also by very conservative estimates, for every $1 invested in peace building, the costs of conflict falls by $16. So this is, we've heard many other examples, but this is just one more. So it's very important to build up these initiatives that are informed also on numbers and on evidence and facts. And because our hearts know that it's possible, but we also need this further support of numbers and evidence. But if we look at budget allocation in governments, not even mentioning the US, but looking at Germany also, there we can see a prioritization which is still militarized in a way. So the money goes to the to the defense ministry. It has, please correct me if I'm wrong, but about 43 billion euros that are invested on that side. And if we put together the budget of the foreign ministry, 5 billion, and then of the development ministry, it's another 10. So we have the estimates, and these budgets of the foreign ministry and of the development ministry, in a way, if I can call it like this, are not essentially on peace. So what we're calling for is for a ministry that has a clear mandate just on peace and on creating peace building. And we have heard also peace and peace movements is chronically underfunded. So this would be maybe a logical, maybe simplistic, I don't know, we can see in the discussion, but a form of securing budgets. Everyone, we live in democratic societies and everyone wants to live in peace, but somehow we're not maybe taking it as seriously as we should. And also, as we've heard yesterday, are we preparing for war or are we preparing for peace? And so I think this is key to reflect on this. And so this initiative is trying to connect to different partners, and we're working at the UN with a Costa Rican ambassador. Costa Rica has also a Ministry of Peace, and they would sponsor a UN resolution calling for departments of peace worldwide. And we're also collaborating with the University of Peace, which is funded, or it was founded by the United Nations. So there are quite interesting partnerships that are coming around. And yes, and the other thing is that this initiative intends also to change the narratives. We've heard so much about security, and of course it is important, but it seems that sometimes the security discourse also denies a discourse on that is central, focused on preventive peace building in a way. So this is a thing that narratives matter, and also stories matter. The story of Bertha von Suttner is also, in a way, an empowering story that, one person could make such, and one woman could make such a great impact until today. So we're focusing on this renewed campaign of building peace, and there are many campaigns already, so we have to unite and not go away alone. And we think politics is very important, and transforming structures on policy level, on political level, and politics, the framework. But the key to peace is us. We all are. So what For Peace also intends is to create capacities for a culture of peace, so making capacity building through peace education, maybe promoting a national curricula for peace, and so that we can have many peace ambassadors, as I've mentioned before. And yes, I think I can sum up with that. And also to look at other institutions and to focus on peace. We've also heard where are the museums of peace and history lessons. We hear about wars and what war has been won, if wars can be won, and what wars have been lost, but so little about peace. There are no peace museums, and there's no peace ministry, to put that point. And so this is where we're heading for, and we invite you to all be part, to connect our different organizations, our initiatives, and in a way, yes, lay down our arms, as Bertha von Suttner said, and rise for peace together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So we've had two people from the parliamentary side speaking, our political scientists, and now we have a legal expert, an expert in international law, from the Human Rights Research Centre of the Charles University Faculty of Law. Anna Červeňáková is an expert in these areas and is also involved in a number of international peace and law initiatives, such as the International Peace Law Committee of HWPL and the Drafting Committee for a Global Bill of Rights. She's also worked in the Czech Foreign Ministry in the International Law Division and has been involved in the Czech Bar Association as head of the Civil Law Unit. So Anna, we look forward to your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much for that.
Can you bring the microphone closer to you? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I do fully agree with what has been expressed by the previous speakers, and I have to say personally that since 2008 I was somehow considering what is happening with the world. And it seems to me that at the present time we are, as a humankind, getting some kind of lesson. And I'm asking what this lesson is all about. Because since 2008, we are somehow hit by one crisis by another crisis. We have gone through economic crisis, and probably now we've got on a crossing in the world where we do face crisis of values. So I'm asking, what is the way out? Do we have to stop and think, what is the right direction for the present world? Do we know what is the right direction? Do we have the right leadership that will be taking care not only about themselves or their close ones or their own community or their own country or their own region, but do we have leaders who are taking care for the well-being of the whole world? I have to say that I'm getting upset. And somehow, for me, the system is stopping to function somewhere. And I'm asking again why. Why is it that we cannot take a step ahead and that we are stopped? And of course, the question of war and peace is an essential question, because throughout the centuries, unfortunately, the world has experienced short or long wars of different kind, either regional or universal. And the lives of people lost in war, unfortunately, will never be compensated. I'm asking, if life is so precious, why wars or armed conflicts still persist? Is it so difficult to understand that the respect of one life is meaning also the respect of another life? I'm asking again, would there be a day when wars will stop and we will enjoy de facto peace in the world? I personally believe that realizing peace is possible. One way is to exchange the culture of war with a culture of peace, as it has been mentioned by the previous speaker already. The culture of peace represents a system of values, where on the first place is the respect for human life. Additionally, it means ending war, armed conflicts or violence, and taking a real action in promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Peace, sustainable development, realizing the friendly relations among nations, and of course not excluding the needs of the present and future generations of environment. Culture of peace is closely connected also with the respect for freedom, justice, rule of law, and solidarity. The major purpose of adopting the Charter of the United Nations was to save the present and future generations from the threat of war and not to repeat the human experience of the First and Second World War. When we look at the world today, we see that there are places which enjoy high level of peaceful coexistence, but there are still places which are still somehow experiencing armed conflicts, and it is an everyday life experience of thousands of people, including women and children. Unfortunately, also now on the land of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I have to say that high-level political disputes bring conflict as well. And when the states do not agree, when they are not able to find a will of political agreement in respecting the international law obligations, because I don't see the problem in the regulation of the international law obligations, but where I see a problem is the problem of implementation of these international obligations arising from both bilateral and multilateral treaties. Humankind is threatened now by the fear of an aggression, of using the nuclear kind of weapons. The other threat which we are facing right now is already the mentioned threat of terrorism, but also ethnic and ideological conflicts arising on a local level. Therefore, I think we still need to continue seriously with systematic effort to find solutions for these conflicts. Bertha von Suttner did not see any noble aspect in the victory of war. I also believe that we should rather be upset about the fact that wars even start. That is why prevention is so necessary, as well as the continuity in disarmament with the respect for international treaties regulating the field of disarmament. Unfortunately, the present situation from a legal point of view is showing that some of the states rather like to withdraw from these international treaties. This was the recent case between the United States and Russia. This is not a positive sign or signal when it comes to the development of those obligations that states have bound themselves to follow in the field of disarmament. And not respecting these bilateral or multilateral treaties in the field of disarmament, of course, again brings tension, not only politically, but also legally, as there is a risk of damages on the lives of the people, property and environment, but also there is a risk of the legal damage to the coexistence of international order. Prohibition of the use of force and the use of exception by the possibility of individual or collective self-defense is not an easy issue. And looking at it again from the point of view of public international law, we get into a situation of difficulty. There may be moral or political arguments justifying the depth of the reasons why armed force has been used, but the Charter of the United Nations is clear on that. It talks about the prohibition of the use of force. Using the means of peaceful solutions of disputes, such as diplomacy, or through a third independent subject, like conciliation commissions, or by the support of the United Nations in solving the dispute disputes among states in my point of view, should be preferred instead of using force, because there are means for using for the peaceful settlements of disputes. If states sometimes conduct wrongful acts, the international community has reacted through the work of the International Law Commission. And this problem has been solved by the creation of the draft articles of the responsibility of states for the internationally wrongful acts. The draft is in the form of declaration, but it can be concluded that it has a significant relevance for the states. When it comes to the private entities for which the use of religious conviction in order to justify violence and threat of states, international community has adopted relevant treaties against this problem, and it should be well known that terrorism is a criminal offense. Because it has nothing to do with the freedom of religion. Freedom of religion, of course, is limited, and it's limited by the freedom of religion of another. But in using in making the religion as a means of justifying violence, I think there is no space for this understanding. Therefore, strengthening the efforts for a culture of peace and the implementation of public international law may be one of the ways of making progress in these challenging times of humankind. We may unfortunately get into deep international crisis if public international law is not being respected. Additionally, investing in the prosperity of mankind rather than in the development of weapons can bring more effective results for peaceful coexistence in the world. It is absurd to think that there are people in the world who suffer from hunger or do not have an access to water, housing, education, or are displaced, while there is focus given to the development of weapons rather than to solidarity. We, as humankind, shall still continue striving for promoting and maintaining peace in the world, so that war will never be a fear for the present and future generations. Everybody has the right to life, and we as people shall live on this planet as a human family, in peace and with de facto protection of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes for discussion because we start lunch just a little bit later, seeing we started the session later. You can use the UN version, I think that's the UN version if you want, of putting your name card up like that if you're wanting to speak, and I'll be able to see that. And I see Bishop Stolstedt. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you for this very rich, informative and inspiring panel on a topic which really needs to be scrutinized very carefully and moving in the direction which is implied in the appeal of all the speakers. Just one or two observations bringing us also to the discussion yesterday. The role of civil society. If you go back to the 80s, I had the privilege of participating in special sessions on disarmament, non-proliferation treaty discussions and so on, and at the same time was part of the non-government inspired marches in New York. We were several 100,000 outside marching in Manhattan, especially on the nuclear issue. And we believed that we would have an impact on those who were in the General Assembly discussing issues. But that was an illusion, because they came there with a clear policy which already had been defined through months of discussion in the different ministries. So they were speaking in a way out of manuscripts while we were marching out of ideals and values. That situation has changed because there is no particular or no important issue today being dealt with at the UN General Assembly which is not open in its preparation to participation on civil society, either on the committee level or even with opening statements as we have experienced at the General Assembly. This is important. But at the same time, it implies that, for instance, the marching against nuclear weapons is not any longer there. It's a better line. Where is a better line? Are you not hearing what I'm saying?
It's because of the translators.
Did you hear?
We could hear.
But the translators.
The translator didn't hear.
So which mic?
Maybe we can summarize.
I'm not going to repeat. My point is that when we consider the strategy of today, we have to include both the civil society, the changes in civil society mobilization, and the changes in the structures developed by governments. And it has been reported to us very well today, the magnitude, the pluralism, the complementarity of government structures on European, on regional, and on global level. If we link this to the climate issue, which today is in the category of the nuclear issue, we have the marching, the mobilization of civil society, and one more important element, we have the young generation taking over. People of my age become nostalgic about our marching against nuclear weapons. But that does not mean that we can today diminish the engagement that we have to do it through the channels, established channels. But we are not doing it unless we have the pressure from individuals with personal prophetic voices that press towards these policies. And I've heard the panels welcoming that. So, in conclusion, let me just say that on this level I'm optimistic. And I'm also optimistic relating to the first issue we had today about the peace index. It may go too far in terms of what some of us do in terms of our peace agenda, but it helps us to understand the concept of positive peace as an inclusive understanding of human welfare which cannot isolate the individual from the collective. And this, I think, is what moves us forward today, and where a conference like this, at this place, is an important step in the strategy of Bertha von Suttner.